All in? Oh, thank you. So everyone has a chance? Okay. Also, the staff put out additional staff reports for anyone who hasn't had a chance to look it over. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give folks a chance to sit down then. Welcome to the regular meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, July 28th, 2016, 7:30 p.m., Brisbane City Hall. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson? Present. Commissioner Doe?
Present.
Commissioner Manier? Here. Commissioner Parker?
Here.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Here.
May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So for the consent calendar, please note that items listed as consent calendar items are considered routine and will be acted upon collectively by one motion, adopting the Planning Department's recommendation unless a member of the public, the Commission, or staff asks to remove an item to discuss it. Prior to the motion, the chairperson will ask if anyone wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. Does anyone wish to remove an item from the consent calendar?
No.
No.
Okay. So may I have a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented?
I motion to approve the the consent calendar.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
On to oral communications, limit to 15 minutes total. Does anyone in the audience want to address the commission on any issue not on the agenda? No? Okay. Thank you. Written communications. Okay. We wanted to acknowledge having received comments via email from the following people. The Center for Creative Land Recycling regarding brownfield studies. Anya Miller with comments for the staff report, proposed changes to the resolution. Elizabeth Weber regarding property in the lagoon. SAM-CEDA with the support for housing. SF Housing Action Coalition with support for housing. Center for Creative Land Recycling with additional brownfield studies. C.C. Herman, support for PC recommendations. Reed Smith, LLP, on behalf of SFPP LP, concern with development around Kinder Morgan. City of Brisbane, response to Reed Smith, LLP. Dana Dilworth, reasons to not certify the EIR. Dana Dilworth submitted a white paper, The Precautionary Principle in the City and County of San Francisco, dated March 2003. Daniel Camp supports housing. Sonal Singla supports development. Rano Colonna wants to limit housing. And Rosina Lee proposes half the housing that is proposed via the developer's plan. Okay. Anyone else have anything written that they want to share? No? Okay. So on to old business. Public hearing. Baylands planning applications, Baylands concept plans, Brisbane Baylands specific plan, general plan amendment case GP-01-06, and related final environmental impact report. Universal Paragon Corporation is the applicant, owners are various, APN is various. Staff report, please.
Yes, I'll turn the presentation over to our consultant, Lloyd Zola. We made it this far. And what I'll go through is really briefly what we're going to be doing tonight and what we're asking of the Commission this evening. Just as by way of background, the things you've already been through are up on the screen right now. You've talked about basic principles for the Baylands, appropriate land uses, key features to be preserved, and those features being the things around which development would occur, the most appropriate land uses for each of those development areas, appropriate development intensity, and the environmental impact report. What we had tried to do was follow as closely as possible all of the discussion you had into the staff report and into the draft resolution in front of you. The content of the recommendation that you're being asked to make really includes just a couple things. One is, as I mentioned, we've compiled the direction you gave through the public hearings regarding land use, development intensity, environmental management, and the environmental impact report. And so your recommendation, as expressed in that resolution, deals with land uses and development intensity. It deals with a recommendation regarding UPC's applications for a general plan amendment and a specific plan, as well as dealing with the environmental impact report. Those are the three sections after all the whereases. Now, the land use recommendations I'll run through real briefly are based on the discussion and based on your direction to date, and these include an open space framework that's shown on the screen, the land use areas, a listing of specific land use types for each of these areas, and your general land use direction. Land use direction being a maximum development of 1 to 2 million square feet of building area in addition to what's already within the Baylands, to incorporate the applicable provisions of the sustainability framework into the general plan, and then some basic principles incorporated into the general plan, those being preserve large unbroken blocks of open space, to protect key habitat areas, to restore the roundhouse, provide compatible development surrounding the roundhouse, transit orientation for development, as well as ensuring that the site is safe for future uses. And those are the basic principles that you had laid out in your very first meeting, or very first deliberations meeting. The other part of that land use direction involves describing the relationship between the city's planning review and the review of site remediation that will be undertaken by DTSC and the regional board. And that, very briefly, the idea was determine land uses first at a general plan level, then DTSC and the regional board would work through the review of remediation plans and Title 27 landfill closure prepared by the applicant based on those land uses, and then a specific plan would be considered by the city only after those remedial action plans, and the Title 27 closure was in place. Also, tying the provision of infrastructure to land development and setting up performance standards would become part of the general plan, so that each increment of development, however development of the Baylands is phased, there would be a very clear understanding of these are the performance standards that all infrastructure must meet, and how do you tie the provision of amenities to land development. And then also, based on your discussion, recognizing the potential that the high-speed rail authority would place a maintenance yard within the Baylands, and saying that there are certain things we as a community need from you, rail authority, if you do this, one being mitigate your environmental impacts, noise, air emissions, and so on. Providing community benefits. I think Commissioner Parker had said, what's in it for us? And so looking at how does a rail yard, if the authority goes to do it, how would that benefit the community? We would ask for that. And third, asking the rail authority to replace current and future revenues that would be displaced by a potential rail yard. Recommendation regarding UPC's application is based on, or the draft recommendation in your staff report, as well as the proposed resolution, is based on your land use direction. And the simple recommendation regarding UPC's, or the draft recommendation to the council regarding UPC's applications, is for denial of those general plan amendment and specific plan applications. And the basic reasons, the commission went through, as we just talked about, laying out what it is you thought you determine would be appropriate land use for the Baylands, and then in looking at, as we talked about, does the UPC application conform, or is it consistent with the direction you gave? And it's inconsistent what UPC is asking for a number of reasons. First, your recommendation is for an increase of 1 to 2 million square feet, and effectively the UPC application, including the area of residential use, is more like 11.7 million square feet of increased development. Housing is currently prohibited by your general plan. The commission, your direction was to maintain that prohibition. UPC's applications propose residential. The commission's recommendation has utility scale energy generation, very similar. In fact, the overall direction you gave is very similar to the renewable energy generation alternative. That utility scale energy generation is not part of the developer's plan. There is substantial amount of renewable energy generation, but not the utility scale that you've recommended or was your direction. The next one regards recology. The direction you had says we will provide for recology to come back in the future with an application, and we will review it. In the UPC plan, it's simply incompatible, so you are not recommending approval of any expansion by recology, but you are not essentially developing a plan that says it's inconsistent with our plan before they even apply to you. And finally, the UPC applications and the developer-sponsored plan, as you noted, had a long list of significant unavoidable impacts, including traffic, and the direction you gave, as reflected in the draft recommendation to the City Council, substantially reduces those significant unavoidable impacts. So based on all of that, it translates into what would be a recommendation to the City Council of denial of the UPC applications. Regarding the environmental impact report, you had a lot of discussion about various means of how to approach the environmental impact report. Certify it in relation to the 1 to 2 million square feet that you are recommending, or recommend not certifying it. The direction you gave, as reflected in the draft resolution, is to certify the EIR in relation to the level of development that you are recommending. I think that you would be saying that the EIR adequately addresses that level of development. And there are a few things you asked for to be added. One would be a requirement to undertake updated biological resources surveys in essentially the spring before ground disturbance, which is a very reasonable requirement given the length of time that's occurred from the time the EIR was done until today, and the length of time that would evolve or still pass until actual ground was going to be disturbed. The second is that before the council would take any action, to reevaluate all of the impacts at the level of development that you are recommending, to determine what is significant at 1 to 2 million square feet, what is less than significant, and then revise the mitigation measures accordingly for the level of development actually being recommended, and then modify the mitigation monitoring report based on the 1 to 2 million square feet. The direction you gave also, as reflected in the draft resolution, says that if council is going to consider some level of development greater than 1 to 2 million square feet increase, there are certain other things that ought to be done. One is to look at additional methods of reducing or eliminating the noise associated with pile driving, and that's not an issue in terms of your recommendation, because the areas that pile driving would typically occur are the renewable energy field. Additional analysis of on-site contamination, characterization of waste within the landfill, if development is going to be occurring within that landfill, that those additional studies would need to be done, and additional study of site remediation in relation to water quality impacts for that much larger level of development that council may ultimately consider. Also, if the council were to consider approving higher level of intensity than what is part of your direction and draft recommendation, to update the traffic study, look at additional mitigation measures to deal with the traffic that would occur in excess of the 1 to 2 million square feet that is part of your draft recommendation. And finally, if buildings are going to be taller, if there's going to be substantially more buildings than what you're recommending, additional work on impacts related to windsurfing should be undertaken. All of those last couple slides would come into play only if there was a consideration of something in addition to or beyond the 1 to 2 million square feet that you are recommending. So the summary of the recommendation that is we put together based on your direction and reflected in your draft resolution is, 1, to modify the general plan to provide for a maximum increase of 1 to 2 million square feet of building area in addition to what is already within the Baylands. Second, to incorporate the open space framework and the recommended land uses for the planning areas, those 2 graphics I showed earlier and are in the resolution, into the general plan. To incorporate the applicable provisions of the sustainability framework into the general plan. To specify the relationship between the city's planning review and the remediation review being undertaken by DTSC and the regional board into the general plan. To provide policies in the general plan that will ensure whatever phasing occurs, each increment of development will have adequate site amenities and infrastructure. The other part of your recommendation is would be a recommendation for denial of UPC's general plan amendment and specific plan applications, and then a recommendation of certification of the EIR for the level of development that you are proposing or that would be proposed as part of this, the 1 to 2 million square feet, subject to those certain modifications. And that's what all of that resolution with, I think, 15 pages worth summarize on this. And I'll actually, if you'd like, I'll leave this up for the entire public hearing, so you'll have that to refer to as the public speaks. So with that, we've spent together almost a year getting here. And I think it was well worth the discussion. So if you have any questions before you would open the public hearing, I'd be glad to take them.
Do we have any questions for Lloyd?
No, at this point, no.
No,
No, thanks.
not at this point.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Okay, before we start the public hearing, I'd like to give some preliminary guidelines. So tonight's public hearing is for the Planning Commission to consider formal recommendation to the City Council for the Baylands, and is the result of nearly 1 year's worth of workshops, public hearings, and deliberations by the Planning Commission. And we really appreciate the public's input and participation throughout the process. This meeting is going to be structured as follows. The staff provided a summary of the proposed recommendation that the Commission is considering this evening, and we will reopen the public hearing to give the community the opportunity to comment on the draft recommendation before us. And depending on the number of people, did everyone get a chance? I saw other people come in. Did they get a chance to do a speaker card? If you haven't, please help yourself. It's on the table to your left. Currently, we have 21 plus 2, that makes 23. So we were thinking that each person will be allocated 3 minutes, and try to stay within that realm as best you can. And if you need clarification or additional points that you missed the first time around, please feel free to come back to the mic for 2 minutes. But again, if you come the second time, please fill out another card so that we have a running record of of who's speaking and what is being discussed. Okay? So following the public testimony, the Commission will close the public hearings and consider the land use and environmental recommendation to the City Council for the Baylands included in this draft resolution. Did anyone have any questions as to the process or procedure? Okay. So with that, I'd like to open it up to public hearing. Yeah?
Just one point of clarification on the timer. There are lights on the dais. where the speakers will be.
Oh, okay.
When the light turns yellow, that means there's 30 seconds remaining of the 3 minutes. So that's just for the audience's benefit.
Oh, okay, so I'll just kind of wave to you, okay? All right, with that,
Excuse me 1 second. Is there any way we could get a couple more chairs from the back? Or is that, okay, thanks. Go ahead.
okay.
You said go ahead, we can start.
Okay. So with that, Ms. Barbara Ebo. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Shall I start, or do you guys want to organize? All right. Good evening, everyone. In addition to spending over a year in the Planning Commission, many in this community also spent over a year actually reviewing the draft EIR. Some people here have come here tonight believing that housing is needed to clean up the Baylands, but what does that mean? How will housing clean up the Baylands? Obviously, the houses will not do it themselves, so let's look at this statement. Is it the money? According to the financial analysis, UPC will receive about 10% more in profits on housing. Sounds good until you think about the fact that the City of Brisbane will be absorbing the infrastructure and service costs associated with residential development just like any other city would. The City of Brisbane is small and cannot absorb these costs, and any development agreement will shift these costs back to the developer to some extent. So in the end, UPC will be getting little or no extra money for housing on the Baylands. So clearly it's not housing money that is going to clean up the Baylands. Is it the state-regulated standards for cleaning up 100 years of unregulated dump? UPC says it will clean up the site to whatever level is mandated and has not offered to do one bit more. While doing the minimum required is disappointing, the statement would seem to imply that adding housing will increase the level of cleanup required. Absolutely, if people are living on the ground floor. However, people will not be living on the ground floor in this development. They will be living above garages, commercial spaces, and so the cleanup level mandated by the state, whatever it is, will be the same, housing or no. Approving housing will not trigger additional cleanup on the Baylands. So it is not the money and it is not the regulations that will determine if housing cleans up the Baylands. Why do they want to build housing? Is it that Mr. Chen Yu Hao, the man behind the UPC curtain, cares about the plight of the working class people here in the Bay Area? I don't think so, and I don't think any of you do either. Allow me here to move from fact to rumor. What possible reason does this leave us with? There has long been a rumor that UPC is trying to push up the value of the land in the likely event that it is taken by eminent domain for the high-speed rail yard. I'm sorry to inform you, if you came here tonight from the UPC-sponsored meeting before this hearing or at their invitation, you are being used as a tool. Not to build housing on the Baylands, but to effect the transfer of a greater quantity of money from the California taxpayers to Mr. Chen Yu Hao and his investors. The media perception of Brisbane has been that it is irresponsible with regard to housing, but building housing on quicksand liquefaction zone, hiding an unregulated chemical soup known as the Baylands, is what is irresponsible. The general plan was a well-considered process.
Sorry, Barbara, time's up.
I'm on my last paragraph. May I please finish?
Go ahead, finish.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
The general plan was a well-considered process. Defiling it would be political suicide for the Planning Commission and the City Council. The good news is that Brisbane is not composed of selfish people. We are not ignoring the housing crisis. The City of Brisbane has spent over $100,000 of taxpayers' money on the Parkside plan that will not only meet but probably exceed our housing needs. If you are here because you are people of conscience too, not as a tool for corporate profit, I would ask you to consider that your efforts are misdirected here tonight. Please take your fight to Atherton, where they have met 12% of their housing needs, Belmont 12%, Burlingame 16%, Colma 3%, Foster City 7%, Menlo Park 27%, Portola Valley 0%, San Carlos 24%, San Mateo 15%, and South San Francisco 15%. Your time would be better spent in those places. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask that we refrain from clapping because we want to give everybody the feeling that we're all being equally heard. So please refrain from applause. Mr. Tony Varios?
Through the chair, he has pulled his card.
Oh,
So the next card.
Mr. James Roy Gomez?
Good evening, Honorable Planning Commission. My name is James Rigomez, and I'm here representing the San Mateo County Building Trade Council. San Mateo County Building Trade Council is comprised of 22 local unions, representing 16,000 highly skilled men and women, all of which that live in the county, and many of which that live here in Brisbane. We stand in support of UPC. The project as proposed will provide thousands of local jobs and will use local labor for construction. Housing is a critical component of the project and should not be cast aside in an effort to be sustainable. That makes no sense. Sustainable development includes housing. We can't keep building more jobs without more housing and assume that other cities will build the housing. We need to build the housing right here. If we can build the housing, we should build the housing. Construction and trade workers are a big part of the housing conversation we are having in the Bay Area and a big part of the population right here in Brisbane. Many of our workers can't afford to live in the Bay Area anymore, so they move out to the fringes, to the Central Valley or even further, and commute in for work. They are being displaced. They are struggling to find work because construction costs are so high that local projects import low-cost labor instead of using local labor. By continuing to say no to enough housing, cities perpetuate this problem, leading both to housing shortages and higher costs. We blame tech and green jobs. We blame workers on white buses, drivers that clog the freeways, and executives, but they are not the ones saying no to housing. You are. Every time we say yes to building anything other than housing, we are adding to the problem. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Michael Barnes?
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Michael Barnes. I'm a Brisbane resident. The 1994 General Plan Economic Development section was forward-looking and defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Brisbane's lack of affordable housing is now affecting the next generation's ability to meet their housing needs. Some of our children cannot afford to live anywhere nearby. We need to provide housing for the next generation with high-density housing between the two rail stations and served by Samtrans and Muni bus lines. I've worked in Mission Bay for 8 years and have seen firsthand how successful high-density housing along rail lines can be. Mission Bay is also built on an old rail yard. I'd rather live near housing than an active rail yard. When the 1994 General Plan was adopted, global warming and climate change were unknown to us, and they are not mentioned in the General Plan. Also unknown was the possibility of bioremediation of the trichloroethylene under Schlag Lock. Thanks to this new technology, today the TCE concentrations are lower, and that is just one way that some of the land in the Baylands can be made safe for housing. The facts have changed since 1994, and now our policy must change. We must allow housing on the Baylands between the two active commuter rail lines. This makes much more sense than the Parkside Plan, where active, revenue-generating industrial uses would be converted to housing that is far from transit. And I'd also appreciate, it's been a long time since I was on the Planning Commission, and I'd appreciate an explanation by the city attorney about prejudice in judging and considering the application before you. Because I understand a couple of commissioners ran on a no housing platform, and another commissioner was distributing Krebel literature. And I just want to understand how that's not prejudicial to the application before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Anna Shute.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Anna Schutte, and I'm here as a volunteer for Greenbelt Alliance. Thank you for this opportunity to... Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the Brisbane Baylands project and the Planning Commission's recommendation to the City Council on the project and related environmental impact report. Greenbelt Alliance is the San Francisco Bay Area's leading organization working to protect natural and agricultural landscapes from sprawl development and help our cities and towns grow in smart ways to make the region great for everyone. We are the champions of the places that make the Bay Area special, with more than 10,000 supporters and a 58-year history of local and regional success. Since the 1980s, Greenbelt Alliance has provided an independent validation of outstanding infill development proposals to ensure that the right development happens in the right places and doesn't occur where it doesn't belong. After careful review, we have provided our endorsement of the vision laid out in the 2011 Brisbane Baylands Specific Plan, also known as the DSP, which calls for a smart mix of new homes, shops, and jobs in walkable neighborhoods well served by transit. Our endorsement is conditional upon the following three issues being addressed. First, a sufficient number of homes must be provided. Creating an appropriate balance between new homes and jobs is essential for creating a thriving community. The proposed 4,434 new homes should be seen as a minimum. Second, due to the housing affordability crisis in the Bay Area, the majority of the permanently affordable homes must be dedicated to the needs of low and very low income residents. Third, the city must carefully design a phasing program to ensure that sufficient homes are provided in each phase of the development. We are therefore very concerned that the Planning Commission is considering a recommendation to prohibit any new homes on the Brisbane Baylands site. Taking away this opportunity for new homes on one of the largest underutilized sites for infill development in the Bay Area is a recipe for substantially degrading our quality of life. By exacerbating the jobs housing balance of the area, it will further exacerbate the Bay Area's housing crisis, which is affecting families across the peninsula, putting a strain on people's pocketbooks and threatening our long-term economic outlook. It will also drive new housing development to the furthest edges of the region as the new workforce looks for homes they can afford, generating unnecessary traffic and congestion and putting at risk the Bay Area's iconic natural and agricultural lands. To conclude, we believe the DSP outlines a solid step towards making Brisbane and the Bay Area a better place to live. We encourage the Planning Commission to reconsider its decision to recommend prohibiting housing on the Baylands site and to instead adopt a vision for growing smartly for the benefit of our environment, our economy, and our quality of life. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Eric Tassio.
Good evening, council members. My name is Eric Tassio, and I'm a business representative with the Plumbers and Steamfitters Local here in San Mateo County, UA Local 467. Tonight I'm here to speak in favor of the Baylands project. I would like the council to say yes to jobs, yes to livable wages, and yes to this project. Please help keep our construction and trades workers living locally by making affordable housing available to these workers. Not only will this project provide livable wages, but it will also provide union workers good medical benefits, as this is part of their collective bargaining agreement. Again, tonight, I ask that you support this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mike Feria, is that right?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mike Ferreira,
Ferreira, thank you.
and I am the chair of the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club and the acting conservation chair. And we met last night to make sure what our position was regarding this. And while we have some concerns, we came to the conclusion that your support for largely what is the preferred environmental alternative is the correct decision for a planning commission to make. We do have some concerns that we think there's too much parking there for considering that you have this interstice of BRT and the railroad. One would think that more constrained parking would get people to use those. We also have a lingering concern about the water that would be available for it, although that concern would be less with this alternative than it would be with the others because it would use rather less. All in all, we think that for a planning commission, you're making the right decision. If there's a different decision to be made by the city council based on regional issues, I guess that would fall to their bailiwick. But for now, we think you're doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Al Gilbert?
Good evening. My name is Al Gilbert. I'm a resident here in Brisbane with my wife, Carol Zoltowski. Overall, I'm pleased with the general recommendation of the Planning Commission, but there still seems to be a very slippery slope of negotiation that's possible. So I'll read the statement as I prepared it. The Brisbane Baylands Final Environmental Impact Report lists 15 negative reasons not to build the project. Any one reason would suffice, but if you need more convincing, you've got 14 other good reasons not to move forward with the project as suggested by UPC. When I read the Baylands brochure, I couldn't help but be puzzled by a number of initiatives, some the major one which you've addressed. The first thing they say is the project will create 20,000 new jobs. Are you sure? Because currently we can't seem to attract enough jobs to fill the office buildings over Sierra Point. Universal Paragon also has approval for 1,700 units already at the Schlegel Lock factory site in San Francisco. Isn't that enough? Do we really need another 4,400 units in the Brisbane Baylands? If they do build 4,400 units to house a minimum of probably 8,000 people, many with children, who is paying for the building of the additional elementary and middle schools in Brisbane? Who is paying for the additional policemen, firemen, and city workers necessary to service a town almost tripled in size? Who is paying for the new and maybe larger city hall? If we do approve this project, what guarantees, or any part of this project, what guarantees are there that anything will actually be built? Will we end up with another dead zone, fenced off from the public like we have next to the marina? The sun reflection glare from the proposed solar panel farm will drive down prices of properties on the hill on the east side of town, and God help the airline pilots taking off in the direction of those panels. So my wife and I moved to Brisbane 14 years ago, and it's not as if we want to pull up the drawbridge and say the housing shortage should be solved but not in our backyard. I'm open to considering the proposed Parkside development and willing to take on our share of the housing market challenge, but relative to Brisbane's size and infrastructure resources. This UPC application is way too far out of scope for Brisbane. For our town of 3,600 people to take on the additional population of 8,000 more residents is like asking Brisbane to host the Olympics for life. So therefore, I ask you not to vote in favor of the UPC application. The Brisbane Baylands is not a community development, it is civic suicide.
Thank you. May I ask that you turn that into, that would be great, to the staff?
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Linda Detmer?
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Linda Detmer. I want to start by saying that I have read the draft environmental impact report and the EIR, the final EIR. And I support the Planning Commission's findings that this development is inappropriate to Brisbane and would require a change in our general plan, which prohibits housing in the Baylands. The 1994 general plan was designed to protect the delicate nature of our community that has become now desirable to so many. I'm delighted and thankful that the commissioners recognize the value of staying within the guidelines of that plan. In addition, I'm not in favor of building any homes on the Baylands due to toxicity, which has the potential to sicken so many. Unless there is complete remediation by removal of all toxic material that has been dumped on the land. There are many remedies, some take longer, and all are very expensive to the developer. However, this developer purchased this land with eyes wide open and disclosure of the toxicity, agreeing to accept the land as is. We owe the developer nothing, and particularly because this developer takes no other interest in our community. Housing in this area would only benefit those that do not live in nor care about Brisbane and line the pockets of developers while bringing very little benefit to our city and would not be low-income housing that would ease the housing crunch for lower-income people. This is not about not in my backyard. I have called Brisbane home for 48 years. Years ago, this was a place that was not popular to live. Brisbane was a small town of affordable housing with dumping around it at the edges of our bay. We suffered the stigma of being the dump town. People who moved here did so because of affordability. The treasures we found were in the beautiful mountain that we enjoyed, the phenomenal views, the very short commutes to downtown San Francisco, the sense of community, and so much more. We have claimed our city and protected it from further interference by other cities or developers. Prior to that and since then, we have incorporated into a city, created a city council, written a general plan, maintained the ridgeline, saved San Bruno Mountain, closed the dumps, built a marina, purchased open space, and now have a beautiful park. We have now become attractive to buyers who are looking for a better way of life, the life we carefully crafted, created by the town fathers, and supported by, as some call it, the old guard. The values that have been set by those people are values that continue and are wanted. We have avoided being invaded by developers who want to take over and build enormous projects. However, nothing so daunting and large as the Baylands, which if built will be the end of this close-knit and important community as we know and have created it. We may be mandated to zone for some 248 or so new homes. However, we can absorb that with creativity and thoughtfulness that will maintain our culture as it has evolved. I commend the Planning Commission for their thoughtful deliberations that will ensure that we keep the treasure we now enjoy, and I pray that the City Council will take your recommendations to heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So again, I invite any of you who have written statements to, after you deliver it, to please submit it to the staff. Ms. Dana Dilworth?
Planning commissioners and staff, many accolades to the voluminous undertaking that you are about to complete. Good work. And many citizens agree with your conclusions, as you've starting to hear. I, however, don't think you should recommend certification of the EIR while simultaneously listing its inadequacies. The reasons for not certifying the EIR is that the proposed mitigation measures haven't been changed. I hear we might change them in the future, and that the list of overriding considerations is overwhelming and not entirely accurate. I think we can mitigate some of the things that we're saying aren't mitigatable. There appear to be few changes to the mitigation measures, which ultimately produced the vast list of overriding considerations. These details need to be worked out prior to approval, not after the fact. To write into law the assumptions that water deals will be made, that the public will allow more toxic burners as are proposed in Recology's 1 million square foot expansion plan, or that the Water Quality Control Board and staff and other agencies will make all future decisions, puts the public at risk. Even Dr. G. Fred Lee recommends an independent oversight organization and a different approach to the cleanups. The precautionary principle is a way to avoid mistaken assumptions and mistaken risk assessments. Consider incorporating a precautionary principle, and I've included the white papers from the Environmental Research Foundation. Stronger language is needed that low impacts mean low risk. In the 1994 general plan, we had set the public risk threshold at 10,000 jobs or workers to be potentially exposed at any one time. Is that still your or our number? Because now 10,000 more people, 10,000 here, 50,000 seat venue. Anyway, I don't want to take up time trying to mention that there are places you should look at it. Higher public use in the forms of a transportation hub, energy production, water recycling, and education are all desirable, but we need to set limits there too and have clearer definitions of our terms. There are few studies in the northern BD Recology area as they are not part of the landfill closure plan. They've used that area for truck dismantling and who knows what. The BBCAG has been informed that a few prior leaking underground fuel and solvent storage tanks, the LUST list, had been located and removed, but there may be others, and so studies for this area is totally inadequate.
Sorry, Dana, time's up.
Okay.
Is this was this part of the submitted paperwork for the written communications?
It's part of the submitted. What wasn't attached are a series, I wanted to also mention, conclude wind power instead of only saying solar, and that there are examples of wind tower generation in Dubai that are actually in skyscrapers, but they don't have impacts because they are enclosed chambers. And so I would like to include this into the record. Thank you.
And again, we have the 2 minutes if you want to clarify further comments after we cycle everyone through. Thank you. Mr. Ben Cohn?
Good evening. My name is Ben Cohn from the Office of Assemblymember Kevin Mullen. First, I'd like to thank you for your public service. I think knowing going in...
the Office of what?
Assemblymember Kevin Mullen.
Oh, Kevin Muller, okay.
Going in, knowing that you'd be working on a proposal and project of such consequence, and probably that you wouldn't be able to please all of the people. We certainly understand the political and personal realities that come along with that. That said, tonight you have an important decision before you, and we'd just like to add our voice to the conversation and ask you to consider and reconsider the housing needs in the region, the impact on traffic, and the ever-growing imbalance in jobs and housing that we're feeling up and down the peninsula and in the regions beyond. So with that, again, thank you very much, and good luck to you tonight in your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn Philman or Miss Glenn Philman?
Glenn Fieldman, resident of Brisbane. I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for its very hard work on what is clearly a fraught subject. I think you're doing the right thing by refusing or saying that you're going to recommend no housing on the Baylands. I thank you for considering the cumulative impacts of all the housing projects that are proposed for this area. There are a number of them, not only the Schlage Lock site, but also at Candlestick. There's another big one in Daly City. I don't remember the particulars, but the cumulative traffic impacts are going to be horrendous. And right now, the infrastructure is not there to cope with it. And that was identified as one of the findings of the EIR, and I'm glad that you considered that in your deliberations. I also like the fact that in the recommendation that you have proposed to make, you have considered the possibility of relocating some of the industrial development that is currently within Old Brisbane, if you will, the industrial park, over to the Baylands. I know about the housing crisis firsthand. I'm a renter, and my rent is going up every single year. And if I lose the place I currently live, the possibility of finding another one is pretty slim. So I really appreciate the housing situation in general that's been talked about by a lot of people. I think Brisbane should do its share, and perhaps more than its share. But it seems to me that in making decisions about housing in this area, we need to consider Brisbane as a whole city. And that is something that really hasn't, it seems to me, been done sufficiently when we've talked about the Baylands. If we have more housing in Brisbane, I would like to see it located over here, where it is close to and could potentially revitalize our main street, provide more customers for those businesses, and provide much needed places for people to live. Your recommendation leaves that possibility open, and it's one that I definitely support. So thank you again for your hard work on this. I think you're doing the right thing for right now. I think you're doing something that doesn't foreclose the possibility of future housing, but leaves room to consider where that housing should best be located at Parkside and perhaps even in the industrial park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Corey Smith.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Corey Smith. I am with a 17-year-old San Francisco nonprofit called the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. As previously mentioned, we submitted a letter encouraging you to build housing on this site. The first thing I want to do is show you this graph. This was in a Wall Street Journal article this week that shows the distribution of total jobs created in San Mateo, San Francisco, and Santa Clara County versus the amount of housing built. The green is obviously the offices, a lot more so far. I'm 28 years old. I am a renter in San Francisco and working for a nonprofit. That means homeownership is completely impossible. We need a paradigm shift, in my opinion, across this entire region. I was working in tech. I was making a lot more money than I am right now. But there was a problem. My generation is being economically exiled from this region. It is not intentional in a certain sense because nobody wants it to happen, but because different entities in different jurisdictions along the entire peninsula and across the entire Bay Area are not doing or exceeding their fair share. It's just an unintended consequence, and it's really unfortunate. I've heard that we need 40 years of a pro-build mentality to actually make the region affordable. I talk with communities for a living. I go around San Francisco. I've attended probably about 40 different neighborhood meetings so far this year. So I get that paradigm shift is really, really difficult for some people to understand. And I know that a lot of people in this room that have called this place home for a very long time have a tough time with that. And I know it's difficult for somebody that none of you have ever seen before to just show up and say, hey, this is what I think you should do. But we're bleeding. Millennials everywhere are bleeding. For those that have kids, the opportunity to buy a house in this area just doesn't exist. When it was stated earlier that they don't understand how this would add to the community, it creates a community. People are the vibrance that brings communities together. When I went to college, my mom gave me two pieces of advice. The first was to floss, because dental hygiene is very, very important. And the second one was always do more than is expected. And so when you have an opportunity, when you have this opportunity, I urge you to think about younger generations, and I urge you to have a sense of intergenerational justice. And it is a very, very tough bullet to bite. I don't deny that in any way at all. I understand that. But as somebody that wants to call this place home, please, please reconsider. Please build housing. We need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Frank?
Good evening. I'm Tim Frank, and I'm the director of the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods. And I am very pleased to see you paying attention to all the testimony tonight. This is really important. It's an opportunity to discuss not only the future of Brisbane, but also the place that this place, the role that this place places in the region. I'd like to actually point out that there's an opportunity not only to do what's right for the region, because clearly building, if you look at the choice between building another 1970s era single-use auto-oriented commercial development versus building a full mixed-use sustainable community, from a regional perspective, it's clearly better to actually include housing in the mix and actually build a really full, complete community. But what makes this really compelling is that this is not only something that you can do that's right for the region, it's also something that's actually could be good for Brisbane. Right now you actually have a very small housing stock, and you actually have a population that's not really adequate to support a full-service retail scene here. And you can see that. You can see how your local retail is actually struggling. And if you look at the opportunity that the new site actually presents to bring not only a really beautiful amenity to the community, but also to add the necessary housing to give you the critical mass to actually have a really full-service retail scene, it strikes me as something that's a huge benefit to every one of the residents that already lives here, giving them an opportunity to have a full-service retail scene right here rather than having to commute over the hill to find all sorts of services that actually aren't currently available right here in Brisbane. And to build all of that right around a commuter rail station is a tremendously sustainable thing to do. And as for the solar features, it's important to recognize that a utility solar installation that's a transit-oriented system doesn't really make sense. It's better if you want to actually address the issue of sustainability to put solar on rooftops rather than as a utility scale operation, the kind of thing that you'd put out in the desert or something like that, or in relatively undeveloped lands. Here you actually have, in the heart of one of the largest job centers in the western U.S., on a commute rail line, an opportunity to build a full sustainable community and then put solar on the rooftop. And that is actually how you reduce greenhouse gas emissions most, as well as providing the opportunity to improve the quality of life for residents here in Brisbane. And I'd urge you to take that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Feeney.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Scott Feeney, and I want to ask you to please either recommend to support the developer-sponsored plan or to work with the developer to find a project that is feasible and that builds a comparable amount of housing near Caltrain. I live up in the city of San Francisco, and I work down in Menlo Park. And when I'm riding the Caltrain to work, I'm usually reading a book or looking at my phone. But one day, I decided to look out the window at the Bayshore Station, the third station on the line, counting from San Francisco. And I was surprised to see, instead of any housing or any businesses that seemed to be there, it was just an empty pile of dirt. And I was a little confused about that, and I wondered what's going on with that. And I could have just written it off. I could have shrugged my shoulders and gone back to looking at my phone. But the thing is that I've seen firsthand how big of a challenge we have with our housing shortage here. I've had multiple friends of mine, good friends, leave the Bay Area because they can't afford to live here anymore because the cost is too high. And it just seemed like a waste to me that we have this, transit line that we've invested so much in, and it's not being used to provide housing that we desperately need. So I decided to do some research into the Baylands project, or into what was going on with the area, and I found the Baylands project. And I think it's exactly what we need as a region. And I also think that, as some of the speakers before have said, it will bring benefits for Brisbane as well. Some people have mentioned traffic as a reason to oppose the project. I think that's actually a reason to support the project. Because if you look at what's happening when we don't build housing that's close in, what happens is that people who have to, teach our children and work construction jobs and fight fires and things like that, they end up being forced to the fringes of our region, to places like Antioch and like way down in the South Bay where there's no transit, and they end up having to drive long distances. So it actually makes traffic worse. So I ask you to please think about the young people who are struggling to afford housing. Think about the traffic benefits of building housing close in so that there are not as many people driving through Brisbane, and please support housing on this site. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sonia Kraus or Kraus?
Hi, my name is Sonia Traus. I'm here. I actually live in Oakland, which is on the other side, basically, of San Francisco's Central Business District. I consider myself in the same neighborhood with basically anywhere that's within a half-hour commute of San Francisco's Central Business District, because when we add jobs without adding, housing, prices go up everywhere around that job center, and displacement goes up. This particular project I came down here for because it is the gold standard for good planning, to build new residential next to transit where you don't have to tear down existing residential and you don't have to tear down existing commercial. I do actually go all over the Bay Area. The first speaker said, why don't we go to these other towns? I've been to almost all of the towns to speak in favor of other good developments. I started out doing it as a hobby. Now I'm in politics, so it's sort of part of my job, I guess. I have to say, every single town says we've done our share, so everyone believes that they've done their share, which can't possibly be the case because we don't have enough housing. So someone, at least somewhere, is mistaken in their belief that they've done their share. And also, everyone has a good idea for somewhere else that we should build. When we're tearing down existing commercial, for instance, the small business owners in those commercial spaces are very distressed. And we support housing even though they're distressed, and it kind of makes me feel bad. Sometimes we advocate housing pretty far away from transit. And, people get frustrated because they're like, that's not a good idea. People are going to have to drive. And we support it there too. But here, none of those things are the case. When I go to other places and they say, why don't you build housing near transit where you're not tearing something down? This is it. This is that project that everybody else wants you guys to do and is the right thing for the region. So I do understand that doubling your population would be very different for this town. I think there's probably some people who might be excited to be part of a bigger city. But all of those problems could be solved by letting San Francisco annex that part of the Brisbane Baylands. So if that's really anybody's primary concern, San Francisco, I think, would be happy to annex the residential part of the Brisbane Baylands. So all of the concerns about, paying for schools and whatnot, I will help you get San Francisco to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn Stivers or Stevers?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Evelyn Stivers, and I work with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work with communities and their leaders to create and preserve quality, affordable homes. And I'm here tonight to urge you, like many of the speakers before me, to reconsider your position and to include housing on this site. I could go into the problem, and I will, but, I understand that there are some challenges with the site, and people feel like they are protecting their community and protecting people's future health by voting against housing. I just want to remind you, the social justice community was really frustrated by redlining that was happening in communities throughout the country. And a few years ago in the Bay Area, Urban Habitat formed an organization called the Center for Creative Land Recycling. And they specialize in cleaning up, working with developers on cleaning up areas, making them suitable for development. Just because of developments like this, we're passing us by without housing. Work with them, come to an agreement on what is clean enough. Don't just pass this opportunity by. In the last few years in this county, we've added over 50,000 jobs and less than 2,000 homes. That's why people are getting displaced. That's why women are crying in my office. Just a couple days ago, a woman came into my office desperate for housing. She's losing her housing on August 1st. About half of people that get an eviction notice or that have a dramatic spike in their rent become homeless for at least a month or two. And that is because jurisdiction after jurisdiction is coming up with reasons why they can't, why they're not going to, why it's not, this isn't right, why this isn't the right place, this isn't the right time. Find a way to say yes. Please, work with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Milo Traus.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Milo Traus. I also live in West Oakland, which is kind of, the counterpart transit station to the Bay Shore station on the Caltrain here. And so in Oakland, we're building housing there some. I show up there, and I am happy for that. And so here it's a, same scenario. The economy is growing, and we should be happy. We should be celebrating. The new neighbors who come and move in here are going to be interesting people from all over the world, which will be a big benefit to the community. And for people who are kind of worried about kind of the community feel here, the right thing to do is to welcome people. And the best way to do that is by giving them a place to go. Because if you don't, and there's still growth economic growth despite the lack of building new housing, the people who want to come and contribute their ideas to new products and innovation are going to be looking to stay in the existing housing stock. And it's not just young people who are suffering, it's people of all ages who have people bidding on their house, to live, instead of having a new development right by the Caltrain station that they can come move into and take to work every day. And then the people who are already here who want to maintain the nice town feel that they've had have a better shot at doing that because there's another place for other folks to go. And Brisbane has an opportunity now to be a leader, really, in the region, to be like, look, we have this project, there's some problems with it, we could have said no, but we said yes, because it's the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Maybe we just didn't need it, but the whole region needed it. So please say yes to this residential building. Thank you.
Thank you. Van Raymond Guan.
Good evening. I am a local resident here. I moved to Brisbane.
I'm sorry, could you say your name?
Oh, sure. My name is Raymond. I live in Brisbane here. I moved here in 2004, and a few years later I moved away. And I love Brisbane so much, and I moved back a couple years ago, and probably plan to retire in Brisbane here. I also have two kids that attended Liebman Middle School here, so I'm really a local person. I completely understand the people that have been here for a long time. This town I also call home as well, and I completely appreciate their hard work and try to preserve the place and a beautiful place as it is, and don't want it to change much. But as I look back and I hear other speakers that are coming from San Francisco and Oakland and other cities come in, I said, okay, let's do this. And as a local and a local residents in Brisbane, of course, I said, who are you that is coming into my town and tell me what to do and build more housing and cause other potential issues in this beautiful town? But as I reflect and listening to all the speakers, I have a feeling that, yes, it is a beautiful town and a lot of people that do a lot of work here to preserve this piece of land, and I now call it home. But we also need to share as well, right? It's easier to hold on what is so much treasured to you, but also looking around that other people also may have the same need. So my opinion that we need to also thinking about not just Brisbane, but also other community that may need some assistance as well. And here we have an opportunity to be a good neighbor. So I would maybe not 4,000 units, that may be too much, but maybe substantially less, but open our heart and share our beautiful city that we all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ratna Aman.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ratna Amin. I'm the Transportation Policy Director with SPUR, and thank you for allowing us to speak. SPUR is a member-supported nonprofit that promotes good planning and good government. We have offices in 3 Bay Area cities and work on regional issues. And I really appreciate your very careful deliberations around this major project in your city. And I really admire many of the courageous comments made today. I just want to speak to a few of the issues that are clearly in play. First of all, I will echo the comment that this is a site of regional significance. It's been designated as a priority development area in our regional planning process. It's deeply interconnected with every other city in the Bay Area. And we do look to you to take some regional leadership here and include housing in the site. And that's the real issue at play that we want to speak to. I know traffic is a concern, and as a transportation planner, works with a lot of the transportation planners in this region. I want to ask that you think about the future when you think about traffic, just as we're talking about the future when we talk about housing. A lot is going to change. We're making a huge investment in electrifying Caltrain. It's going to become a modern, attractive system, and the amount of service that goes to a particular station or city will depend on what's happening in that city. So that's one aspect I want you to consider. There will also be the bus rapid transit, and just in this region, we're developing the next generation transportation. And so our issues of traffic, I'm very confident, are going to be different in 5, 10, or 15 years, whether it's driverless cars, e-bikes, bike sharing. We're aggressively trying to address these social needs and these and the pollution and just the nuisance that traffic is. So I want you to have some confidence in that. I also want to mention that the problem of governance of public services are ones that we should try and overcome instead of saying they're just really difficult for a small town to take on. And I would like for SPUR and some of my peers to be partners in thinking about that. How do we help a small place grow and take on these new responsibilities? And I will also echo what's been said about housing, that any supply is going to help relieve the pressure in your town and in other places in the Bay Area. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Richard and Becky Wu. No? Okay. David Crabb.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is David Carab. I'm not here representing any organization, and I'm not representing the Paragon. But I am coming in with having over 20 years of experience studying and promoting sustainable development. And in that regard, I have some concerns about the sustainability of this project. First, that the current plan is touted as being sustainable, but Brisbane is defined sustainability only through an environmental lens. Your sustainability guidelines say you should address the 3 E's of sustainability: the environment, the economy, and social equity. But this plan addresses only the environment. It fails on social equity and it fails on the economy. In social equity, it is clear that the greatest problem right now in San Mateo County is the glaring imbalance between jobs created and the provision of new housing for those new employees to live in. You see it everywhere, in every city up and down the peninsula. The plan can be expected to generate up to 6,500 or more new jobs, which will require housing for up to 4,500 families. Yet this plan, this is your plan now I'm talking about, not Paragon's plan. Yet this plan includes absolutely no housing. Instead, it creates lots of jobs and foists the provision of housing onto adjacent communities who are struggling themselves to provide housing for their own citizens. This is not only selfish planning on the part of Brisbane, but it's also unsustainable planning. Without a more equitable balance between jobs and housing, this robust economy of ours is going to eventually crash and burn, probably sooner than later. This plan should include a substantial amount of housing to offset the number of jobs being created. On the economy, your economic feasibility memorandum of March 22 said the cost to remediate, restore, and develop infrastructure for future development could run anywhere between $600,000 to $1 billion. There's no way that a development of $1 to $2 million square foot of R&D development, plus recology, a lumber yard, retail, an industrial tank farm, and an energy farm, plus a Caltrain parking lot, can support the cost of that scale. This plan is economically unfeasible if you wish to create all the parks and do all the environmental work you propose. Either the scope of the development needs to be increased or the scope of the environmental improvements need to be reduced. For transit-oriented development, this plan is touted as transit-oriented development, yet all the illustrative examples I've seen by staff show widely spaced buildings and vast numbers of parking spaces. This leads me to the conclusion that you do not really believe that this plan will reduce auto traffic. The areas closest to the Caltrain station in Geneva are Recology, which will have few employees in comparison with offices but generate a lot of truck traffic, Renewable Energy Farm, which will require very few employees, R&D, which will have a lot of employees but may or may not be transit-oriented, depending on how it's designed, and a couple of other industrial things here. The small retail and recreational area around the Roundhouse is most likely to be designed as auto-oriented and be economically feasible. So to conclude, the plan should include housing, the plan should be economically feasible, should be mixed use, and the plan should take full advantage of its transit-rich location. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Burry? No? Okay.
Good evening, Chair Doe and Commissioners. My name's Mark Burry. On behalf of thousands of construction workers and hundreds of local large and small construction employers, thanks for this opportunity to comment on the Baylands project. I hope we all agree we all benefit in many ways from our thriving local economy and job market. Unfortunately, housing's severely lagged behind, providing low inventory and high-cost residences. The workers I represent are pushed further and further away from their jobs, commuting longer and longer times and distances, stressing them and their families. The employers I represent complain of long-term, hardworking, and normally reliable employees that are now fatigued and not as reliable as they have been due to their forced longer commutes. Or worse, those same valuable construction workers move away entirely, working elsewhere and further depleting our employer resources. With that, I ask you respectfully to consider residential housing components to the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny Ames.
Thank you, Planning Commission, for the countless hundreds of hours I'm sure you're spending on this vastly contentious issue. I moved to Brisbane in 1980.
Sorry, and your name?
Danny Ames.
Okay.
I moved to Brisbane in 1984. I was a renter for 3 years. I saved up $10,000 thinking I could buy a house. I'd need about 3 times that much, and I paid off my house a couple of years ago. I feel I should carry a bit more weight than a lot of people that have come into town. I'd like you to count, Ms. Doe, how many people have spoken out of Brisbane, because I feel I should carry more weight since I've been here for 3 decades plus, and I have a list of things. So I'd like to echo Barbara and Dana Dilworth's comments. I reject UPC. I feel we're being railroaded with this project. We don't have to accept it. It's our town. I understand the saturation of the housing. It's booming economy. It is tough. It is hard. I think the amount of housing that this would add, if we were to approve it, would be a drop in the housing bucket per se. I also would think that I had a comment on if you had to allow this, it should be a modular, multiple-phased project. And if you can't back down and you feel you have to allow some of this to happen, we should do it in small phases to check it out. The concern I also have is a report, one of these oh my God reports that came out in the Insurance Journal National, April 12th, 2016, that sea level rise could be 3 meters or 9 feet by 2050 or 2060. And these are insurance companies coming out with these findings. So that would be a concern. I mean, we wouldn't call it the Baylands for nothing, right? So we're going to build something in the Baylands with a possible 9 feet of sea rise by 2050. That should be a consideration. Candlestick was torn down. There's Potrero Hill. I mean, doesn't San Francisco also have a lot of options for growth near us? Why does Brisbane have to be picked on? I don't think we should be dumped on with all this housing request. I know that's probably strong to say, but I support the Planning Commission's findings. And again, thank you for hundreds of hours on this contentious subject. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Michelle Salmon. Oh.
Michelle Salmon, Brisbane resident. I know all of you, but I don't know all of you. And if Danny weighs a bit for 30 years, I must weigh a ton, because my mother moved here in 1930, and I grew up here in Brisbane. And I just want to ask you, do you feel slapped and shamed enough now to bow to the developer and the do-gooders that have come before you and not bothered to do their homework and read the 6,000 pages of draft EIR and EIR that you folks have read? Do you feel shamed enough now to bow to their will? No, because you know what's right, and you've read the reports, and you've done the work and done the studies, and you know what lies beneath. And I appreciate that work. I've been part of that work. And so have many members of this community. And I feel insulted to have outside people come and try and cram regional housing down our throats when we've worked so hard to protect the mountain, to protect the Bay Area, to be part of a whole community. I wasn't here earlier because I stayed to listen to Hillary Clinton's speech. And sorry, because I've heard a lot of this already. And she said, plant the seeds for a garden you won't see. And that's exactly what my father did, and the other 4 council members when we first became a city in Brisbane, and we annexed the Baylands against the will of Daly City and the county for a better future. And they were in it for the long game, as are you, as am I. I think it's important that we plant the seeds for the long game. There's an old Shaker proverb that says, live each day as if though it were your last, which many of these people seem to want to do, and as if though you had 1,000 years to live. And that is the planning scope that you need to think about when you look at the Baylands, and you have in your deliberations and your very considered decision about what's appropriate there now. Maybe something else will be appropriate there 100 years from now. But in making the decisions you've made, or that you hopefully will make, you are laying the groundwork for a better future. Yes, we have immediate housing needs. You know, build it and they will come, and build it and more will come, and build it and even more will come. Okay, the planet cannot support 7 billion people, and yet that's what's happening now. I think having R&D for renewable energy, for solutions that will take us into a much longer future than 4,000 houses that benefit mostly the developer, not regional housing needs or regional transportation needs. So I think you're making the wise and prudent decision for the long game, and that's what we need now, is thoughtfulness about truly the long game. Where are we going to be 50 years from now? Where are we going to be 100 years from now? Where are we going to be as a society, if we're even still on this planet for the destruction we've done, 1,000 years from now? I got to watch what was put in.
Michelle, sorry.
And
time's up.
And I think that if people really knew that, they would consider what they're asking you to do. And I appreciate the work you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Dondi.
Hi, I'm Amy Dondi, Brisbane resident, and sitting here listening to a lot of people who came here from other places talk about our community. I'd like to stand up for our community, and I support the Planning Commission in their findings. And one of the things that I have felt from the very beginning, well, actually, the first meetings I went to about this project many, many years ago, when I had moved here, nothing was ever discussed about housing. And then I remember one meeting when he said, oh, and this is where the 4,400 units will go. And I was like, really? Well, that's new. That was never proposed. It wasn't in the general plan. I also remember them sort of glancing over a slide that talked about liquefaction in just a moderate quake, because they had to dig down 250 feet to be able to get to bedrock. So for the person who said, oh, there's all this empty land there, well, there's stuff under there too. So, but talking about community, and whenever I've talked to the people at UPC, and they said, why don't you want housing there? I said, it's not just, for me, it's not just about the toxics that's under the soil there. It's also about having this bifurcated community. A town should grow organically. To have suddenly a place that's going to have 3 times the population of Brisbane, and who's going to build? Or the people who came here in support of housing, it's not their money that's going to have to pay for this. It's our little community. And so to anybody who knows about the Ridge, I mean, there's very few people from the Ridge who come to these meetings. You know, it's finally happening, I think, and I think that's actually happening because people have moved there with kids, and that really gets people there. But it's always been, it's sort of like there and here, and it's like if we can grow it organically to connect our communities, as opposed to having this plop down there and have no relations. It's going to be 2 miles from the rest of Brisbane. So for all those reasons, and people also talked about affordable housing, that's an assumption. If you look in San Francisco, you'll see all that housing that's being built, $4,500 for studios and 1-bedrooms, that's not affordable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, can we take a little break now?
Okay. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Can we take a break?
Yeah.
Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is that all right?
Right.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break.